Angela Rayner's political career hanging by a bit of a thread. She admitted she underpaid 40,000 quid in stamp duty on her flat in Hove. £800,000 flat. Her seaside home has been targeted now. This, by the way, nobody should be endorsing this, by vandals with graffiti labelling her a tax evader scrawled across the walls and fences. This comes as Downing Street says Keir Starmer could be informed as soon as tomorrow. Some are saying even today whether the Deputy PM has breached government sleaze rules. In a moment, we'll speak to Laurie Wastell from the Daily Sceptic. First, David Smith, property lawyer and partner at Spector, Constant and Williams. David, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Anyone who's ever sat through a court case involving taxation will know that it probably takes about 10 minutes before you start gnawing your own elbows off. And that's just the lawyers. It's a difficult and complex area. We all get that. We all understand it. But, I mean, you know, stamp duty, is that hard to work out?
It became a lot more complicated after George Osborne and then later chancellors created new, more complex rules for second properties. And the problem here is that actually everyone sort of thinks about second properties as people buying holiday homes, but actually lots of people have an interest in two properties if they've helped their kids out. And in Miss Rayner's case, it appears that she was involved in a trust, and the rules around trusts are very complex indeed. And it sounds as though there were pretty legitimate reasons for her to have transferred her property into a trust for the benefit of her disabled child.
Yep.
But there are rules about trusts and second properties, and I suspect that's where things have gone a bit pear-shaped for her here.
Yeah, and it seemed, when I was listening to the interview that she gave with Sky News, there was, you know, and obviously innocence or lack of knowledge, gullibility, whatever you want to call it, are no defences in any kind of law, really. Even if we understand the reasoning behind it, because her point was, well, look, I only live in one property, I've only got one mortgage, I don't literally, you know, it's not really my property, the other place, so it was reasonable to think this was not a second property in the conventional sense. Now, half of you can understand that. The other half thinks, well, hang on, you're the housing minister. You've got more access to legal advice on properties than probably anyone on the planet. So it might be a hard one to swallow, but you're right that it's complex. I think we can all agree you could fall foul of the law and the rules and not do it wittingly. But nonetheless, it doesn't absolve you of responsibility because you are still the person whose name is on the tin.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, also the optics of it being the housing minister who's made a lot of commentary about this area looks really bad. I think there's a point for the legal profession here as well, in that a lot of conveyancing solicitors give sort of slightly ad hoc advice about stamp duty land tax because anyone who buys or sells a property has got to think about it. But the reality is that some of that advice is often not terribly good. And I've certainly seen plenty of cases where conveyancers gave advice that was not particularly accurate about stamp duty land tax, either forcing someone to overpay or potentially leaving them in a position as here where they've underpaid.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite difficult to find people who know this area of law very well. And I think, I know there's been a warning today to conveyancers that they should be more quick to say to people, you should perhaps think about some specialist advice in this area. And it looks as though, I mean, one doesn't know for sure, and I presume the Standards inquiry will look into this, but it looks as though Ms Rayner's been given some slightly ad hoc advice during her conveyancing, whereas she should perhaps have been referred for the specialist advice she ultimately took rather earlier in the process.
Indeed, and you might, I mean, this is almost a separate point in a way, David, but you'd think, you know, I'd extend this to anyone who's a cabinet minister. You'd think there'd be a rule, wouldn't you, in the cabinet that goes, right, anyone who's buying a house, going on holiday, buying a car, whatever you're doing, everything has to be run past this bloke in the corner because he knows all the rules. You might think that system existed, bearing in mind it's not as if we haven't seen politicians jump on these bear traps before.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that political parties don't make more effort to actually enter into fairly strong framework agreements with top-end law firms and run more of their senior people, you know, through a particular funnel where it's being looked at quite closely. But, you know, that would then get into sort of, I mean, the reality is that the political system in the UK has always had a sort of faint amateurishness about it, whereas...
Yeah, true.
perhaps these days it should be more professionalised.
You would think so. So just briefly then, David, on the specifics of this, and it is hard for anybody to know all of the specifics, but it seems then that, because, you know, she has this property in Manchester that she doesn't owe, she can't sell it because it's in a trust. She's not making any money from it. Some might say, well, it's not unreasonable, therefore, to assume that the next place you buy is your only property. But from what we're kind of perming from this story is that despite all of that, it's in a trust, it's for, understandably, you've put provision for your child who has some special additional needs, etc. All of that makes, I think we all understand that, but it doesn't absolve you from the possibility that you are legally still declared somebody who is buying a second property, even if you can't benefit from the existing one.
Yeah, and there's a lesson here for lots of people who have probably helped their children in getting second properties as well by loaning them money. If they've entered into a trust arrangement, they may in fact have underpaid the stamp duty themselves, because the rules on trust arrangements are quite complicated, and you should think about some specialist advice on this.
Yeah, contact a lawyer. Contact David. You know, that's maybe the that's the message here. Listen, David, thank you for coming on with us. David Smith, property lawyer and partner at Spector, Constant and Williams. Let's get a word from Laurie Wastell, associate editor at the Daily Sceptic. Afternoon to you, Laurie. I said at the beginning of all of this, and I don't think this is particularly controversial, nothing to do with Angela Rayner's accent, as one of her cabinet colleagues suggested, which was the most woeful of defences, or the fact that she's working class. Peter Carl saying, you know, this wouldn't happen to a Tory. I mean, God, the Tories were pretty much annihilated by the press, and certainly the opposition parties in the last years in office. So that doesn't really stand. The reason that this is Angela Rayner under the spotlight, and rightly so, of course, is that, firstly, she's the housing minister. She literally works in the office with more housing lawyers and free advice than money could buy. And secondly, and perhaps this is even more damning, she's made a living out of exposing malfeasance, particularly those wicked Tories. I mean, this is part of her shtick. It's part of her whole personality. If anyone's going to expose wrongdoing in the Tory party, it's our Ange. Go on, Ange, out you go. And off she wheels with a scum-laden monologue about the horrible Tories. So, I mean, those reasons alone are enough to, at the very least, compromise her position.
I think that's quite right, Ian, and good afternoon to you as well. I think it's really a hypocrisy issue here, more than the actual indiscretion or the mistake, or whatever you want to call it itself. And yes, we have to remember, it wasn't just the media going after the Tories, it was people in the Labour Party, and people like Angela Rayner in particular. I mean, she really went after Nadeem Zahawi when he had a relatively similar tax issue, and in very, very stark terms, including that, for every bit of tax that's avoided, that is putting pressure on the public sector and public services, and that wasn't this such a immensely immoral thing to do. That was that really powerful narrative throughout really the last Tory administration, whether it was tax indiscretions, whether it was party, having a bit of cake at one point, or the fixed penalty notices. There was even one example where Rishi Sunak one day wasn't wearing a seatbelt in a video he did, and this was taken by Labour as some extraordinary indiscretion.
It's a menace of the roads.
Exactly. And so once they've done that for so long in opposition, and now really they're being hoisted by their own petard.
Indeed. Laurie, let's have a little listen here to Angela Rayner on this very point in full flow. Here she is.
Holding any position in public life should mean upholding the highest standards of ethics and integrity. But the cronyism, sleaze and scandal we've seen over the past decade has undermined trust in politics and public life at home and abroad. Misconduct and sleaze has a direct impact on a government's ability to deliver for the public. Transparent and accountable government is key to delivery. Cleaning up politics is about ensuring government actually delivers for the people.
There it is, and it really sort of corroborates the point we've been making, Laurie. You can't really say stuff like that and then suddenly say, yeah, but it doesn't apply to me.
Well, quite right. It's almost as if you don't need me here. Angela Rayner's biggest critic is Angela Rayner, really, just from the past. And yes, it's been a key line that they've taken. I think what's interesting here is that of course Keir Starmer would love to sort of outsource this political decision to his ethics advisor, and the question is, what will he now say?
Yeah.
But really, this is a way of avoiding responsibility for it, in my view. And actually, the decision should be taken. You know, the evidence is in already. Is it politically damaging enough for her to go or not? And that does, in many ways, speak to some political cowardice there.
Yeah, and I get it. I can totally understand why you might make a mistake when trying to sort out the complex, as a previous property lawyer just told us. I don't have any doubt that it could be difficult, and I might even give her the benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, it was an error, but it was a schoolboy error, or a schoolgirl error, if you like, in that sense. I mean, it shouldn't have been made. I don't imagine, again, back to the hypocrisy point, Laurie, if this had been a Conservative MP with exactly the same circumstances of the reasoning behind putting a house into a trust and provisions for their child who has some difficulties, I can almost hear her on a TV interview going, you know, I sympathise with the minister's plight, however, the rules are the rule. You know she would say that.
Absolutely, and she'd be right to. You know, I don't think people should be spared from this kind of scrutiny, whatever their background is. And I think it has been really a quite sort of cute and cynical way for Labour to defend her, which is basically always pivoting to this line that she's working class. Sometimes it even becomes snobbish in their way of defending her, which is this: maybe she didn't know, she's sort of not used to this kind of thing. She is a grown-up woman, she's a politician, she should know this.
Yeah.
And yes, they would be going after a posh Tory if they did this in precisely the same way.
100%. In terms of what happens next, we have Sir Laurie Magnus, the ethics watchdog czar, as I think you're meant to call these people. He's looking through the details. It could even be later today that he tells Keir Starmer whether she fell foul of the kind of regulations, etc. Doesn't mean she's got to walk the plank, though. You know, we've seen previously Priti Patel was seen to have broken some points of the in-house rules. She remained in office, and I can only imagine, bearing in mind there's a lot of currency in Angela Rayner, particularly with Keir Starmer being on a bit of a wobbly wicket right now. My guess is she will remain in office.
I think quite possibly she will, Ian. Yes, I think there's several reasons. As you say, Starmer is wobbly at the moment, and particularly with relation to the left of his party. He's obviously already struggled to get that welfare bill through, and Angela Rayner is seen as being kind of a friendly face of that wing of the party and the unions as well. I think, ironically, one of the ongoing tensions that the media has liked to play up between Starmer and Rayner is that she's got quite a profile. There's she's spoken of as a potential next prime minister. In some ways, the fact of this scandal has actually reduced her market value for that particular position in the public's eyes now, and that could actually save her from Keir Starmer's acts, because now he doesn't see her as much of a threat.
Indeed. Listen, on that point, Laurie, great to have you on with us. Thank you. That's Laurie Wastell, Associate Editor of the Daily Sceptic.